Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. We have come a fair way to be here, and the reason for that I want to just briefly take you through. We have a formal presentation which we'll put on the web, and I'd commend that to you. So I thought, in the interest of time, I would just run through some of the points I elaborate more on in that presentation. It's almost morning in Australia, and it's our Australian National Day on the 26th of January. It's going to be about 26 degrees. Families will be coming together for barbecues, and they'll be going to the beach and all of these things, and you'll be thinking, what on earth are you doing here, rather than being back in your home country where you could be swimming and surfing and doing whatever else we love to do back in Australia? Well, there's a good answer to that question. It's just not the magnificence of this wonderful place which we're being hosted at for this very important conference. It is because I am an enthusiast for this topic, and I'm an enthusiast for this topic at a number of levels. I'm an enthusiast as a citizen for what this means for me personally, these changes that are taking place, and it's an incredibly exciting time to be part of what is occurring in the world today with these sorts of changes. I'm excited about it in terms of the issues of inclusion that are the topic of this forum today, and Her Majesty, I think, outlined very, very well earlier today. I'm terrified as a father of two daughters about what all this means about how they're going to learn to spend money as they're teenagers in the years ahead. But that is also a liberation that they'll come to terms with, and families are going to have to settle over. But this is a real revolution that we're seeing. And it follows the pattern of many others in the past, and it's exciting as those, and they will bring great liberties and great benefits. But there are also risks and other things that we have to manage. Now, I particularly became an enthusiast not long after becoming Treasurer in Australia, when our own fintech community came to me and they said, we need you to champion this as a Treasurer, as a Finance Minister. And I reflected on that with our team about what that would actually mean and why we would be asked to do this task. And I think it goes to the heart of why Germany has taken on a leadership role in putting these issues on the G20 agenda. Now, Australia, as a number of years ago, was the G20 leader, and we set out issues that we believed were important about global growth. And I think it's wonderful that Germany have taken the lead in putting this issue on their G20 year. And so happy to get on the plane and come halfway around the world to acknowledge and support what Germany is doing as part of G20, and to the Bundesbank and to Minister Schäuble and others, well done, and we want to support you in that in every way we can. So what I thought I would do by coming on here today is going, well, as a Finance Minister, as a Treasurer, as we call them in Australia, what are the collective things that we need to do to forward this agenda on, and how are we doing that as a practical working example? One of the areas that we've touched on briefly today is the area of RegTech. Now, when politicians come to you and they say, or a regulator comes to you and say, I'm a regulator, I'm a politician, I'm here to help, people get immediately suspicious about how that is going to play out for them. And one of the exciting things about the technology that can sit around the regulation in a fintech environment is that at the same time, compliance requirements on business, and especially those in financial services, can work hand in hand with improvements in their business practices in the way that you actually can construct your regulation. Now, when you start writing regulation in code, then you can use those systems to actually bring about better compliance and better business practice and better outcomes for customers and businesses. You get past the situation where you've got a product disclosure statement which is about that thick and is intended to protect consumers, and you tick the box, and Mark Carney sort of referred to it earlier with the permissions and so on. Which can become quite meaningless and protect no one other than the person who required someone to produce the product disclosure statement and cover their position off. But with RegTech, which I think sits hand in hand with fintech in terms of how we roll out the implementation of regulation in this area, you can actually bring those two things together. And Australia is working on those issues, as I know many others are. And I think that's incredibly important. It's one of the issues that we put forward because the cost, some $70 billion a year on compliance for firms in dealing with financial regulation. And that's projected to go to some $120 billion by 2020. Now, if we're going to spend all that money, it would be actually nice to get something out of it. It would actually be great to have a better and more informed and more compliant industry around the world. And so RegTech, working together in this space in particular in financial services, can achieve those goals. Both de-risking and deregulating your environment can go hand in hand when you look at RegTech issues. And so that compliance by design function, I think, is possible in this new system. The other area which we focus on is on fostering collaboration. And in our rather small fintech sector compared to what exists in the UK and other places because of the depth of those markets, we are actually working to boost that collaboration to give identity and profile and support to our fintech operators through their associations. I've established a fintech advisory council which provides opportunities for them to engage with each other, which is so important. I mean, Tharman was saying earlier today that this collaboration between the larger participants and the smaller participants, rather than an aggressive or negative competition, is how it is moving. And so what we're doing in Australia is about bringing those together. We have some of our biggest banks that sit on that advisory council, and our top 4 banks sit in the top 20 banks in the world, and we have some of the smaller operators, some who are new, some who have already had some significant success. And that collaboration is what actually enables our industry to go forward. It doesn't require us to direct it, but the sector basically in getting together and talking to each other starts to present the opportunities. Because if there's one thing I've learned about fintech and the tech sector more generally, is it's only limited by the questions you ask it and the data that you provide it and give it access to. And that will actually provide an organic process of seeing the whole sector develop. On the regulation specifically, we have put in place a regulatory sandbox. We did lift it, literally, pretty much, from what was done in the UK, and we believe we've improved it. And we've provided a regulatory sandbox which all is required is for eligible businesses to notify the corporate regulator that they are going to participate. There is not an application process, just an informing process. But for those who don't meet the initial standards to be able to just go into the sandbox, there is an application process. But in addition to that, through our regulator, we have set up innovation hubs, and they act as a first point of contact for many of those firms, which is a one-stop shop which can direct them through the various areas of regulatory compliance, which helps them take them through those early stages. And some 100 entities have been involved with that process, and 24 new licences. These are not big numbers necessarily in some of the markets that are represented here, but in the Australian market they are. And they've covered everything from marketplace lending to crowdfunding and robo-advice. The infrastructure has to be put in place. Our new payments platform, facilitating real-time retail payments, comes in 2018, and that is an important piece of infrastructure which will support the development of the fintech industry in Australia. So providing infrastructure is an important part. There is a regulatory feedback loop, effectively, by what occurs in these new technologies coming forward, and it's important for that to reflect back on the regulation that it sits in so many other areas. It's changing how we have to do our goods and services tax. It's changing our anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing legislation. All of these things have to keep pace with these developments, but formally within government we're ensuring there's this internal feedback loop which is informing the legislative process going forward. The companies that are developing this need access to capital, they need access to finance. And so we've changed and introduced new tax incentives that sit around early stage investing, angel investing, venture capital limited partnerships, which is providing everything from tax offsets for investing in qualifying companies, capital gains tax exemptions and so on. I mean, other jurisdictions will tailor the tax incentives as is appropriate to how your tax system works. But it's important for these companies to get through what they all refer to as the valley of death. It's no problem finding lots of friends who want to finance you once it's working. But that critical component 4 is where it needs to turn up. Now, if you're in the United States, where there are deep venture capital markets and deep pockets that support a lot of those initiatives, well, that's why they've been so successful in so many of these areas. But in a country like Australia, it's important that we proactively ensure that the tax system will be supporting those companies to find their capital. We're also introducing new crowdsourced funding legislation to support issues there. Earlier we talked about the proof of concept and the exploratory work that is being done. In blockchain technology, in distributed ledger, we also are very active in this space. Our stock exchange is probably leading one of the major projects in DLT as it applies to settlements anywhere in the world. And later this year, they will get to a point of go, no go with their board as to how they go to the next stage. But the early signs are encouraging. We also have a government instrumentality called Data 61. And Data 61, which is part of our National Science Agency, is investigating how blockchain can be used both by industry and the government right across the economy. And that's not just limited to the financial services sector. It's everything from how we run payment systems in our social services sector, how we potentially can ensure that families can find childcare places on a real-time basis because a parent might have a job interview or something of that nature. So again, it is a function. This is just a function of how many questions you're prepared to ask and how much data you're prepared to provide in an open access format. And so this is helping inform us in this trialling and proof of concept stage to see what can be achieved. Standards, not just within Australia, but right around the world, are incredibly important to ensure that something like this works. And Standards Australia, with the support of the government, that's our standards agency in Australia, is leading the international development of blockchain standards as the secretariat to the ISO on distributed ledger standards. And Standards Australia has nominated Craig Dunn as the chair of the ISO Blockchain Standards Committee, and Craig is actually the chair of my our fintech advisory committee in Australia. And the ISO Blockchain Committee will look at areas of interoperability between systems, privacy and auditing, and will work with people around the globe, including many of you here, I'm sure, to produce the standards over the years ahead. So we also need to cover off the risks, and I think they've been well articulated by the Minister in the previous session, as well by the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Mark, who set out the regulatory and other risk issues which are standard to be dealt with, whether in this new development or in any area when it comes to financial services. Consumer protection issues, cyber security, all of these things need to be covered off. At the end of the day, though, when you're embracing something as exciting as this and unpredictable in this, you have to have an appetite for flexibility. It won't go always as you intend it to go, and in many ways you operate a bit like the startup operator yourselves. And you'll start 7 and you'll hope 1 or 2 will get away. And those 1 or 2 will fund the other 5 that didn't make the grade. And unless we take an entrepreneurial approach to the development of these sectors, then I really don't think that we will realise its full potential. That does carry risks, and they need to be mitigated along the lines that have been said here today. But it is for us, I think, to take, a lean forward approach. it's very much our culture as Australians to do that. And it's one of the things we'll be celebrating in our National Day as morning breaks there in just an hour or so. And I think this is a sunrise industry in so many ways, and it is exciting. And so I do want to conclude by commending, again, Germany for deciding to put this on the agenda in the way they have, and to be thinking about it in the way you've heard from presentations today, about the many issues that need to be covered off and the level of, I think, expertise and knowledge which is being brought to it, as you've seen, I think really does commend the way they've been handling it. It would be remiss of me in a forum such as this, though, given the other issues which I've been engaged with in recent days while I've been in London, to not make one parting comment when it comes to exhorting all of those who are involved in the process of the Brexit initiative, and particularly as it applies to financial services, as someone who represents a country that is a long way from that discussion. And we're not in the habit of giving advice or lectures to those for whom they immediately are dealing with these issues. But we would make this observation, that the UK and Europe are incredibly important to the global financial system. And it is imperative that as this process is worked through, that we lose none of the momentum that has been achieved. I mean, if you look at the G20 and what was able to achieve post the global financial crisis, and how that has been tested since, and how all of the things that have been done has been able to take us through since that time. It's important that while the parties have to settle this arrangement, that these arrangements are settled in a way that realise that unless settled practically, unless settled with genuine transition and with certainty and with the maximum seamlessness, and to ensure whether it's settlements or passporting or any of these issues are able to be addressed perhaps in new and innovative ways and with different ways of achieving it. The end state is one that we don't lose the momentum because this is an incredibly important part of the global financial system. Both the UK and Europe and their interoperability and continuing financial relationship is important for the world economy, and that means whether we are a long way away at 26 degrees on a day like today, or you're here at about 0 degrees, then we all need to ensure that we get the best outcome possibly. So I commend those who are involved in that process, and Australia is keen to support. But thank you for your attention at the end of a long day, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and share these thoughts with you. Thank you.